This is Hannibal here from thehannibaltv.com, and I recently rewatched Hitman Hart Wrestling with Shadows, which I hadn't seen since it initially came out, which I believe may have been around 1998 after the quote unquote Montreal screw job. I did like it when it first came out because at that time there was a lot less showing of what goes on behind the scenes. The internet was still dial up for the most part. Shoot interviews you had to actually order on DVD. And you didn't get much behind the scenes. So back when it came out, it was about as good of a look into the behind the scenes as you could get, other than Beyond the Mat. I think this was one of the first movies that really showed behind the scenes. So again, I did like it better when it first came out. I was at that Montreal Screwjob event in '97, as well as the Raw after that. By the way, it's a weird documentary because we're supposed to feel sorry for Bret Hart, who at the time is one of the highest paid people in WWE, and he has an offer for $9 million to go to WCW. And throughout this thing, he's complaining about the angle that he's currently doing, and this is probably the most over angle he had in WWE. It was getting a buzz around this time where it was the Hart Foundation representing Canada against the US, which was like Shawn Michaels, the Patriots, Steve Austin, the Legion of Doom. And around that time, they were doing TV tapings in Canada and the US fairly regularly. So heels in the US, faces in Canada. And the crowd heat was amazing. And you can tell when they're interviewing the crowds outside the shows at this time, there was actual heat. The crowd and the Canadians hated the US. So I thought that was cool because you don't really see many angles with that much heat these days, but you could tell the fans were really passionate about it back then. So he's complaining he doesn't like being portrayed as a heel. Keep in mind, wrestling, you're acting. You're being paid to be an athletic actor. So you got to do what you're told. And keep in mind also that in WCW, he ended up being a heel. As much as he complained about it in WWE, at least when he was a heel in WWE, the angle was over. When he was a heel in WCW, no one remembers it because he wasn't over as a heel in WCW, and he wasn't over as a face in WCW, really, for that matter, other than on a few occasions anyways. But basically it goes into the story that he initially turns down the offer of WCW for a $9 million 3-year contract to stay with WWE for a 20-year contract, also in the millions, but it's more spread out for what the WWE could afford. He's then not. It seems like he regrets not taking the $9 million after he kind of accepts the WWE, because then he's complaining. He's actually going on talk shows complaining about WWE, the company he works for. How many companies, wrestling or not, that you're working for are gonna let you go in the media and bash the company? So while he's still working for WWE, he's going around on television shows saying he doesn't let his kids watch it. He's not comfortable with the nudity, blah, 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 blah. And he says he legitimately considers himself a hero. Now, keep in mind, in recent years, he's publicly stated he used to be a cocaine user. He used it until WWE started doing cocaine testing. He also has admitted to cheating on his wife constantly. He said he needed to do it to feel the fulfillment on the road because he was away from his family. So if you consider yourself a hero, Granted, apparently when WWE put their drug testing into place, he stopped doing it, and he's in agreement that it was good that WWE put cocaine testing in place. He also admitted to using steroids, but basically he's admitted to being a drug user and cheating on his wife, who he had several kids with, and the kids appear throughout the movie. So I don't know how you can consider yourself a legitimate hero when you're cheating on your wife with different women all the time. To me, that's not a good person. So maybe he's changed in recent years, but again, just read his book if you want to know how often he cheated on his wife. That's not a hero to me. That's turning your back on your family and not being loyal to your family. Maybe it's acceptable in wrestling, but to me, that's not a good role model for kids. So anyways, he's whining throughout this whole thing. He's one of the highest paid wrestlers in WWE. His kids are allowed backstage, by the way. Try being a lower card guy and bring your kids backstage, let them run around and bother wrestlers and see how much that gets over. But as a main event guy, I guess you're allowed to bring your kids backstage. So eventually Vince McMahon agrees apparently to pretend like he's still interested, but they basically trick Eric Bischoff into still signing him for $3 million a year, even though WWE didn't want him anymore. Which I heard Hulk Hogan, by the way, in an interview say he would have liked to have known how WCW came to offer Bret Hart $3 million. Like, what was the reasoning? How they thought he was worth $3 million, and Hogan said if he had known that they were going to offer Bret $3 million, he would have asked for a lot more, because he didn't think Bret was worth $3 million a year, considering WWE didn't even want him anymore, and he ended up contributing very little to WCW. They show the Montreal Screwjob thing, which again, they use a lot of WWE footage in this. Tons of WWE footage, including some WWE footage after the screw job of when they brought the midget in, and Vince McMahon's speech with the black eye. And to me, I'm more leaning towards, I don't know how many people are in on it, but I believe the Montreal screw job was a work. I've heard Kevin Nash say the same thing. He was good friends with Shawn Michaels. I don't think a lot of people were in on it, but this movie just uses far too much WWE footage. And there's also footage of Bret Hart secretly recording Vince McMahon, which is illegal. So I just can't see how it would not be a work for the amount WWE cooperated in this documentary. And considering Bret Hart came back and worked for WWE tons, was in main event at WrestleMania with Vince McMahon, was the commissioner. I believe he won the U.S. title at one point. He's been on fairly good terms with WWE after bashing guys like the British Bulldog for going back to work for WWE. Remember when British Bulldog, who WCW used extremely poorly, and British Bulldog allegedly paid $150,000 to get himself out of his WWE contract, went to WCW. WCW wasted him. He got hurt in WCW. Then he goes back to WWE after WWE releases him, and Bret Hart publicly disparaged the British Bulldog for going back to WWE. Then he went back himself, made millions with WWE. So the grudge was not held forever. That's for sure. So say what you want about whether WWE cooperated or not with this documentary. It seems like they very much cooperated with it. And again, Vince McMahon allowed secret recordings that Bret had recorded without his permission to be aired in this documentary as well. So I don't know. That's very convenient. Overall, there's a lot of whining in this documentary, and Bret Hart went on to make his $3 million a year in WCW. He claims Bill Goldberg is the sole reason why he's been out of wrestling, from what I understand, due to some sort of a stiff kick. I mean, he probably had concussions throughout his whole career. He wrestled for decades. It's probably an accumulation of concussions. And supposedly he did wrestle at least 10 times after that Goldberg match. So he continued wrestling with a concussion after receiving that kick, which Goldberg has apologized. And at this point, Goldberg says he's going to stop apologizing for it because Bret Hart is still bashing him for it years later, something that was clearly an accident. And Bret Hart went on to go into WCW again. He was a heel in WCW. The most memorable things I can remember he did in WCW was that match with Chris Benoit in Kemp Arena after Owen Hart died. And the thing where Goldberg speared him in Toronto when he had the chest plate on. Other than that, it was a very forgettable run. He made a lot of money. Good for him. Hulk Hogan said, this is another funny comment. Hulk Hogan said when he heard Bret was making $3 million a year, he would have thought that Bret would have been the happiest guy in the world, but he still continued to whine. I mean, we're all supposed to feel bad for this guy making huge money. More money than a lot of us, more money in a year than a lot of us will ever make in a lifetime. And just for the record, I was at the Raw in Ottawa the night that everyone no-showed after Montreal. And not a lot of people, again, the internet was still in its infancy. A lot of people thought the whole screw job thing was a work and were expecting Bret to show up. The Raw was a very disappointing Raw. The people that really got screwed were people like me that paid money for their tickets for this Raw that everybody knows showed to support Bret going to WCW to make $3 million a year. And all the fans at the Raw in Ottawa got a card that a ton of people know showed, including Bret Hart, who apparently, according to his narrative, he didn't want to actually lose the title. He wanted to give a speech in Ottawa the next night and drop the title instead of putting somebody over, giving back to the company that made him a star. So that's all I'm going to say on that. Yes, I do think the Montreal screw job was a work. Keep in mind, they also let him break monitors and destroy stuff after the show went off the air. Nobody stopped him. I do think it was very few people knew about it. But even Vince McMahon, when they show him walking out of the dressing room, a lot of people said it looked like when Bret Hart punched Vince McMahon in the dressing room, that it looked like Vince was selling the punch. And it's certainly when he walked out of the dressing room, and there's the documentary cameras right there, he's almost selling to the cameras. Ravi, I'm doing great. Thank you, DJ. Yes, Vince showed Bret spelling out WCW on camera. I don't know. There's a lot of too much coincidence stuff happen. And yeah, card subject to change for all of us in Ottawa that got screwed the next night, didn't get our hard-earned money's worth. And no, I don't feel bad for Bret. And I will also say this, WCW dropped the ball huge by not doing a big Canadian tour once they had Bret Hart on the roster. They hardly ever went to Canada. And when they did, they never went to Calgary or Edmonton. They went to Montreal once in a show that Jacques Rougeau arranged that I was there for. They randomly did a house show in Winnipeg once. But most of their shows that they did were in Toronto. Then when they got less popular, they went to Kitchener, which is a town around Toronto, but they have a smaller minor hockey arena. But yeah, WCW, had they gone on a Canadian tour and started doing events in Canada regularly, once they got Bret, they would have got more of their money's worth. But they completely wasted Brett. He was never really over in WCW. He seemed to bounce back and forth from being a babyface and a heel. And it was really weird when they made him a heel after that whole screw job thing. They had him join the NWO. Very bizarre booking. But again, as much as he complained about being a bad guy in WWE, he ended up being a bad guy in WCW.
Thank you for watching the Hannibal TV. Please like this video if you enjoyed it, and click the subscribe button to not miss any of our latest shoot interviews, match videos, or news.